Device Talks Minnesota. If you're just joining us, my name is Sarah Faulkner. I'm the program manager here, so I help to recruit amazing speakers like Sheri. If you're interested in getting involved in that process, talk to me during our reception following this interview. So, Sheri.
Yes, Sarah.
Thanks for being here with us today. As Vice President and General Manager of the two units that you are at Medtronic, can you just tell us a little bit about how Medtronic thinks about managing chronic disease? And tell us a bit about the two units that you work on.
Sure. So I have really good fortune in having been with Medtronic about 9 years, but I didn't start off as general management. I came to Medtronic being responsible for the reimbursement function in the cardiac rhythm business, and then built out responsibilities to run both clinical and economics, and then did value-based healthcare, and then had an opportunity of going on to take over from Dan Cosentino, who started a business called Cardiocom. It was an acquisition by Medtronic 6 years ago, actually. We just had our anniversary. And so had that opportunity, and just last year then, Omar and others felt that because this area of chronic disease was a bit unique, and so much of what Cardiocom, now called Medtronic Care Management Services, was supporting the complex chronic comorbid population, I should take on the business of the type 2 diabetes business. So it's kind of double the fun with that. Reporting into two XCOM members and running two separate businesses, separate P&Ls. But it's a tremendous amount of excitement for me, because both of these diseases are very much in that chronic disease space. And so the question about how does Medtronic think about this, I mean, it's what, maybe 1% of Medtronic's business is in services, for sure. If you think about chronic diseases, Medtronic's divided into 4 different businesses, so you would anticipate that the cardiovascular business would be heavy in chronic diseases, diabetes, of course, chronic disease. But our other 2 businesses, regenerative therapies group, has spine and brain and neuro, and then the former Covidian business, what we call MITG, has a lot of surgical business, but bariatric surgery, so they're in obese. So there's a smattering of kind of chronic disease businesses, but I think the way Medtronic thinks about it is you've got a person, and a person is going to be in a state of health, or various stages of acuity in their health journey, and may end up with a chronic conditions. Many people with chronic conditions kind of tip into episodes of care. So you may have a procedure or an intervention, or maybe you're just going to be managed without having that, but you still need support. So it's a lot of experimenting that's going on right now in the chronic disease space, and I just feel really privileged to be, kind of in the heart of the 1%.
Yeah.
Of services.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how Medtronic approaches managing chronic care, especially when you have to consider the scale of some of these conditions? Like, even if you just consider diabetes, which is an epidemic, even in the US alone. I mean, how do you account for that scale? And, are you thinking about, I know Medtronic partners with a lot of folks, so how do you think about building internally versus partnering to tackle the scale of these conditions?
Yep. So for diabetes, it has been a business that's very technology-based, but it's also looked at bringing more than just the sensor that's getting you the blood glucose level. So recently there was an acquisition of a company called Neutrino, and a great company out of Israel. And Neutrino is very focused on nutritional sciences and really understanding the relationship between glucose and nutrition. And so we're building that out, because for that diabetic patient, how do you make their life easier so that they don't have to think about managing their disease every day? So this sense of empathy is really important, I think, in whatever we do in kind of chronic disease. It's one thing to have a heart attack, not an easy thing, but you have a heart attack, and you go in and you have an intervention, and then you kind of go home and kind of good to go, if you will. In chronic diseases, it's every day. It's something somebody has to think about it every day. So what's the role of technology? And Medtronic plays and has a lot of expertise in that space. But there's areas where we don't have unique expertise, like nutritional science. So bringing a company like Neutrino and bringing that in to understand, and then how would we look at predictive glucose insights. So you're looking at activity, you're looking at meal handling, you're looking at a number of things that are incredibly important for dosing, say for the type 1. But I have a soft spot for the type 2 population, and I'll just tell a short story about this so I can kind of tell you how I think about this. I have a really tiny family. We joke we could fit us all in the back of an SUV. One of my cousins, my only girl cousin, and I only have 4, died at the age of 45 of type 2 diabetes complications. And she started off as a high risk because her dad was diabetic. She was obese. She became pre-diabetic, then she became diabetic doing finger sticks, and then she became insulin dependent, and then she became an end-stage renal failure on kidney transplant. She went in for an orthopedic surgery, and she died. She's 45 years old. And I think about this all the time, and I think about what did she need in her journey so that she could have avoided getting type 2 in the first place. But as she was moving kind of through that journey, what were the interventions that were not about not having access to insulin? But a lot of it was in disease and behavior modification. And that's the hardest thing to nudge. Each one of us know what we should do today. We should exercise, we should maybe get more sleep, we should kind of eat better. And how many of us are going to do that? When we know that that's a choice, it's very hard to do this. So part of chronic diseases, as I think about it, there's a technology play, but there is a behavioral play that I would say that Medtronic is not uniquely expert at, and that's why partnerships and kind of building out solutions is going to have to happen in that area of chronic management.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to watch medtech as an industry try to tackle this kind of changing behavior as technology. Can you elaborate on what you think the industry's role is in shifting behavior? Because, I mean, it's not an easy ask. It's not as easy as, okay, here's a very clearly outlined disease, here's a simple solution, we'll study it in a trial and then commercialize our product. So, how does industry go about doing that?
I think about it in 3 ways, and it may be oversimplified. I think about it in terms of data. You have to have access to data. You have to kind of know what's going on. And what you know on day 1 is very different than what you know if you gather data on day 1, 2, 3, 4. Because you know point, and then you kind of know a little bit more, then you start to understand trends, and when you understand that, you can kind of get to predictive. So data is certainly important. I think medtech tends to kind of see either I have data, or I can connect to data, or I know what to do with data, and data is an important piece. Process is also very important. So you can have discrete pieces of data, but how are they all going to come together, in what order? Call it what you like, but there's an element of getting into care management and chronic disease management that has to be around process. It's handing one piece of data off to somebody else, and something has to be done with that. And the somebody, it could be actually a person, it could be a technology, it could be but there has to be handoff of data, so there's a process component. And then I'm a firm believer that it's still people. Healthcare is people. It is both people with health and people helping people to get better in their health. And I can't envision a day when there is not a person involved in the delivery of healthcare. And I'm a big medtech fan, and I think there's amazing things going on. But I think when we think that we can do things to avoid a human interaction, I think we're on the wrong track. I think we have to find a way of an and strategy. How do you use technology and data and process and people? And I think when all that can come together, we're going to be in a good place. So that's how I personally think about it.
So, earlier today in some of our other keynote interviews, the topic of value-based healthcare came up. Obviously, it's come up at this conference in years past. So I want to shift to the issue of reimbursement. How do you think about creating value and making products in an environment where the financial incentive is a little messy, where it's, people are still trying to figure out what it is, how to execute? Telehealth, you brought that up as an example in one of our calls, where, the market is huge, reimbursement is not great.
Right.
So, how should companies operate and think about value in that kind of an environment?
Yep. So first, don't give up. Don't give up. My father-in-law had a sign that said "Free beer tomorrow," and that's how I always think about value-based healthcare, because we keep thinking value-based healthcare like is the future, it is the tomorrow, and then every day it's like, well, where is it? I've been waiting for it. I'm building product, I'm building services, I'm building business models for this, you know, free beer tomorrow day, and it just kind of keeps not coming. It is coming. It's just in a very awkward stage right now between fee-for-service and value-based healthcare. So it's not going to go away, and it's not going to be here tomorrow. But it's going a lot faster than it used to go. We've been talking about value-based healthcare for 20 years or more, and it'll be there. But certainly, looking at reimbursement, it's very hard to think about product development without the question of, well, is there reimbursement? Because everyone wants to know how they're going to get paid. In the absence of how you're going to get paid, it creates a really uncomfortable environment. So certainly the reimbursement for telehealth and telemedicine is emerging, but it's interesting in terms of the valuation of this is still based a lot on how fee-for-service is based. It's based on DRGs. It's looking at time and supplies. You know, it's looking at you can get $30 maybe for a telemedicine visit, or in a telehealth type of visit, or maybe 50 or whatever. All the dollars are kind of changing. But what is it? If you really put together data, process, and people, that's worth more than $50. It's worth a lot more than $50, but that's not where the payment is right now. So while you know, big Medtronic plays a lot in fee-for-service, they've also got their eye on, has had their eye on value-based healthcare for a long time, and I feel lucky. Who knew at the time when I got into this space 20 plus years ago, it was called health planning and financing at the time. Who knew it was value-based healthcare? My mom's so happy now. She thinks I'm like in the in crowd. 25 years ago, she thought, I have no idea what you're doing. It doesn't make any sense to me. What is this? What is this? So anyway, I'm hip now. But what's interesting about for medical device is that you have to get comfortable, I think, thinking about you're not bringing a device to the masses. So before, whether you're pharma or medical device, you want to sell as many as possible. In a value-based healthcare world, you want to sell as many as possible to the right cohort. And that is different. And it's uncomfortable because it's very easy to understand, I just want to sell a lot to everybody, and the benefit will be applied to everybody, which means you're dilutive to your benefit because you're giving it to people who don't need it. You're giving it too late to other people, where the value time frame is kind of shortened. So really honing in and understanding your cohort, the population of which your technology is going to have the best value, and honing in on that and understanding exactly what outcome are you going to generate, and then understanding what is the baseline outcome, clinical or kind of economic, and then be able to demonstrate what does your do for that discrete population. That's the winning strategy in value-based healthcare. Now, it's kind of, quote, easy to think about it from our side. When you turn it around and talk to a payer, and we've done this multiple times, we'll go to a payer and we'll say, look, we've got this amazing technology. We have implantable cardiac devices. We're able to take the diagnostic data off of the cardiac device, combine it with a home monitoring. I can talk to the patient every day, find out what their symptoms are, their biometrics. I can do all this, and I can deliver value back to you as a payer. And they say, great, how many patients is it? So we go back and we're like, okay, there's of heart failure patients, 10% of them actually get an implantable device. Medtronic has 60% kind of market share. And then of the 60, then so many of them will never say no to the service, and you get down and payers are like, go away, too tiny. Yet you have a value proposition, but it's too small. So I think you just have to triangulate these things and think about what can your product do, but be realistic in terms of if you're asking a payer to pay for it, it has to have significant impact in terms of dollars or number of people. And if you fall somewhere in between, then I would relook at your channel and think about who else can you get to pay for it, or bridge the discussion between a payer and provider. That's been my experience.
Yeah, and so, thinking about you're not selling your product to the masses, really targeting in on a particular cohort of patients. How have you seen clinical trial design shift then over these years as we've moved away from fee-for-service and as we're trying to execute on value-based healthcare? How has that shifted clinical trial design?
Yep. So it comes in two fronts. One, I also feel really fortunate. I've had great leaders at Medtronic that when I was running the reimbursement function and I was asked then to lead the clinical function, I had people in the clinical team told me that I was tainting the clinical by combining economic with clinical. That I'd ruin clinical trials by doing the two. I know it seems crazy now, but at the time, clinical trials were pure and economics were economics, and the two did not kind of combine. So I think first, smart companies, and I think Medtronic's a smart company in this way. It wasn't my idea either, so it's not that I was smart, but they put me in the position to run it. Combining clinical and economic, just bringing the two together, you're going to get a better clinical design. The other is on two fronts. One is it's really interesting looking at some of the composite endpoints. So you can look at a hard endpoint, decrease in blood pressure, but you can look at it in terms of it also decrease in hospitalizations and maybe kind of something else, and start to negotiate with the FDA and with CMS to actually see if you can come up with a composite endpoint on some of those clinical trials. It's been done really successfully in oncology, but I think that there's other areas where you could get successful doing that, where you're actually looking at a utilization endpoint that has a cost implication behind it. Then you can power a lot of your economic analyses, and you can come to the market with a really strong value-based story, even selling into a fee-for-service. So I think that that's been changing, and just better observational studies, better studies looking at data and being able to connect clinical trial data with payer claims data. So you can actually look at a patient who got an intervention and then actually look at their claims to see, all things being equal, propensity match and others, did that patient population have a decreased healthcare footprint, if you will, in terms of avoidable costs, and create a really good story. So it's an exciting time to be in clinical research for sure.
Just thinking about clinical research and efficacy, can you talk a little bit about how Medtronic approaches measuring efficacy when it comes to disease management tools? Because I think it's a little bit cloudier than simply, okay, the patient is all better and the disease is, you know what I mean? So can you just talk a little bit about how you measure efficacy when it comes to chronic diseases and how that might be different?
Yep. So on the diabetes side, I think the standard has been, lowering A1C is kind of a typical way of showing a patient's doing better, although there's been more of a shift now in looking at time and range. Because if you look at actually individual A1C points, could look very different. What you really want to know is this patient in range majority of the time, and then being in range, being highly correlated to complications. So when we look at our CGM or our pumps, it's very kind of easy to measure that because you're collecting all the data. So that's pretty straightforward. I would say on the remote patient monitoring side, it's harder. And there's probably more data that shows remote patient monitoring does not work than data that shows that it does. I'm here to tell you, it does work. It depends on how you're going to measure this. And this isn't smoke and mirrors or kind of shell games here. I've done a number of studies, and the VA is probably the best one kind of for us, where the VA has the largest home telehealth program in the world, and has saved hundreds of millions of dollars. And they've been able to demonstrate that on a per patient basis, not only do they improve mortality, reduce mortality and morbidity, but they can save about $10,000 per year per veteran enrolled in the program. That adds up to a lot of money when you're at scale. A lot of the programs don't get up to scale, and so your whole cost, if you do micro-costing, what does it really cost to give up? It doesn't become standard of care, and I think that it's difficult to find the right kind of break-even point. But being able to decrease emergency room visits, hospitalizations, decreased length of stay, telemonitoring definitely has a lot of those data. Plus, it has an enduring impact, because part of telemonitoring is that patient becoming activated in their own health. So you can remove some of the technology and the daily monitoring. It's kind of like Weight Watchers. If you've ever been on Weight Watchers, everybody understands that a meal should be the size of your palm. If you go off Weight Watchers, you don't not remember that anymore. So when you want to reactivate yourself, you can kind of go back, and there's kind of sustaining and enduring material that comes with a patient self-activating and having some behavior modification, even if they fall off the wagon a bit on their self-management. So it's not great, and certainly the level of evidence doesn't rival what you would have putting a computer in somebody's heart. But it's getting there, and I think we just need scalable programs to actually really show the impact on care delivery efficiency as well as the resource utilization.
I want to shift gears a little bit here before we take some questions from the audience, so I hope you're thinking about some questions out there. You have had quite a career in the medical device industry. Any particular lessons that have stuck with you along the way?
So it's interesting. Many people have heard, if you're here, locally as well, that Omar Ishrak announced his planned retirement, and his successor is going to be Jeff Martha. And so, part of what reminds me about Jeff Martha is when Jeff took on responsibility for the Covidian acquisition. I'll never forget. I texted him. I said, "Congratulations. If there's anything I can do to be involved in this acquisition, please let me know." And like anything, like I was ready to, bring the cookies at the break, like anything to be involved with this. And he said, "I'll pencil you in." So Jeff gets the position, and he calls me and he says, I inked you in, and do you want to join the integration management office and actually do some work here? And at the time, I had just accepted another job working with Mike Coyle on economic value, and I had these two opportunities. I didn't know which one to do. One was temporary, but I really wanted to be involved in something different. The other was economic value with Mike Coyle and CBG, and it was great. And I had somebody advise me to do an and strategy and just negotiate to do both. And that's what I did. So part of my lesson is, and some of my learnings have been about an and. I think my current job right now of running, 2 P&Ls and 2 businesses is definitely an and strategy. And like I said, it's kind of double the fun, double the trouble sometimes. But so an and strategy I would highly recommend. And that also comes with kind of, I hate the concept of voluntold. I think it's like, volunteer. If you have an opportunity to volunteer and somebody says, yeah, put you in, that is something to cheer for. It'll differentiate you. You'll learn more than you could ever imagine. And those opportunities then have also been in kind of areas of risk. Should we partner with so-and-so? Should we kind of go do something here? I don't know, we've already kind of doing this, and I'm just all about jumping in and giving it a try. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But there is something about trying to connect people and connect ideas and raising your hand and going for it, even if you don't know what the end looks like. And it's just served me well.
I want to open it up for questions from the audience. I'm happy to kind of run around. I think I stole the Q&A mic, so.
Watch the step.
Yeah, thanks. Any questions for Sheri? I've got more, so we can keep going, but this is your opportunity. Whoop, we've got one.
Brave soul in the back.
Yeah.
You might hear me from here. Adoption is key in any technology in the healthcare system, and as we evolve towards value-based care, I think that becomes more pertinent to the adoption of the service as well. What is your approach been in Medtronic to aligning incentives, or at least trying to get clinicians and get healthcare professionals on board with the new model of care as well?
So we've been doing a lot in different kind of parts of the organization of forming what we really call value-based healthcare partnerships. So Lehigh Valley is one of those examples. And I think there's been I hope I answer your question the right way. There's a lot of reasons why a company like Medtronic would walk into a provider and feel like we know what their problems are. I mean, it's really the classic, like, we've got a hammer and pretty sure that's a nail, and let's kind of go. And I feel really comfortable saying this in this crowd, that there's been some lessons where that, or we presented and kind of say, hey, look, we've got all these programs, it's like rings, watches, like, which one do you like? And sometimes at the CEO level, they'll be very polite and like, oh, let's get our teams together and we'll go work on this. And you run through a couple of those and you realize, like, that we're wasting time, because we actually probably aren't listening in the right way. So Lehigh Valley was a good example, I think, where we went in as rings, watches, pick one. And actually there was that dialogue for a while, and then they kind of said, actually, here's what our problems are. Do you have a way of solving for it? And with solving for that, we had technology pieces, but we didn't have all of the components, and it completely changed the dialogue. But part of going after that is we did have agreement on what winning would look like. And it would be based on outcomes. It wasn't gonna be based on volume or market share, those typical, and rebates on the other side in a typical dialogue that I think providers and med tech companies have. It was really based on rallying around an outcome, and that it wasn't just gonna be a one and done. We were gonna systematically break it down and think about care pathways and think about technology and think about process and data and people and all of those things. And it's a journey. I think the handshake and the ribbon cutting was 2 years ago, and we're still storming and norming around that. So there's a longevity and a resilience you have to have. But that's how I think the lesson for all of Medtronic has been, we can't just come in showing our technology and thinking that we can solve for a problem. It's really understanding the problem and then unpacking the technology and actually looking at what are the pieces we can maybe put together to solve. Did that answer the question right? It's been a great journey to be part of it over these past couple of years and learning.
Other questions for Sheri while we have her? We got a couple too. Okay.
So when you think about medical device space in this region, over the next year, it might be a two-part question. What do we really need to focus on and get done, if there's one thing? And then what scares you about the next year and our medical device world?
I have the privilege of being the board chair for MedicalAlle, so I get to see a lot of what's kind of happening from this region, and so it's so I'm going to come at it a little bit from that way because I'm super excited about what we've done in looking at early stage ecosystems. So if I think kind of from that hat in terms of we need more funding, we need more, we need to make MedicalAlle not just about a collection of companies, but how the companies come together to actually solve problems. So that is both kind of my fear and the opportunity. So I've never sat in anybody's shoe here in terms of having your own startup or being part of a startup that's outside. I feel it every day at Medtronic, even though Medtronic, I have two tiny little businesses in big Medtronic, and I get the benefits and the downside of both of those. But I don't pretend to know exactly what it's like. But what I do know is that there's so much power in the collective than there is in the individual. So when I think about big problems to solve in healthcare and what role medical companies should play, it has to be, you can't think you're going to come in alone and solve the problem. It's got to come in with a force, a partner on each side. And it could be a payer and a provider coming in, or it could be two techs coming in with a provider that's actually forming a true micro ecosystem to help solve a problem. I think the days of just one big bat coming in and doing everything, if they ever were successful, are no longer. So that's what gets me excited. It can't come fast enough. It cannot come fast enough. So we're doing an initiative, MedicalAlle, called Health Technology, the initiative, and it's really trying to create and bring together the companies in an ecosystem and go solve problems here in the state. And if we can get the governor and others to really understand about the power of this community collectively, people won't, they'll put 2 L's in Silicon Valley. They won't even know they don't even know what it was anymore. It'll all be MedicalAlle people will talk about, so I'm excited about that. You guys were like, Silicon, 2 L, yeah. They're not right together.
Just checking on that spelling. Another question for Sheri? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was intrigued when you mentioned behavioral technology. So could you maybe talk a little bit more about what kind of role the medical device companies play in helping patients in that regard?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much. And so this isn't even really on the Medtronic side. But I think about the goal of, tons of buzzwords about this, but, we have an environment of sick care. If we really want to get to health care, where do people want to be? Where do people want to be the healthiest? They want to be the healthiest in their home. So how do you move people and bring health to the home? Tons of ways that you can do that. How do you bring telemedicine? So you just have, I'm not feeling well, I could have a visit with my doctor in my home. I don't have to get in my car, drive, park, find where the office is, sit in a waiting room, fill out paperwork with other sick people, go back, sit in a cold, sterile room till someone comes in, tells me I'm sick, then tells me to go to the pharmacy. Like, you guys get, like, that is so archaic way of delivering care. So if you think about delivering it in the home, I think about it in two fronts. I mean, there will be a day where tons of sensors, you know, in the home, for sure. And you'll be able to look at a change in pattern of people. So if I live alone and every morning I get up at 6 o'clock, use the bathroom, go start the coffee maker, turn on the television and all these things, and then I stop doing that, that would be an early warning sign that something's going on. If you could do attribution to me. Now, if I've got, you know, 2 people living at home, it's harder to get to the attribution of all of these things going on, but a kind of a sense of understanding a baseline norm and how can you use sensors and data to tell you what's going on, then how do all those data come in together to understand patterns from previous to that something's different. So waveform for voice, even how somebody answers questions, the technology is amazing picking up kind of depression on that way. I would say what we have now is good, but I mean, our technology that we have today is we're bringing a technology into the home, asking a patient to engage with that technology every day, answer questions and take biometrics. But it involves them standing on a scale, putting on a blood pressure cuff and doing a pulse ox. That's better than them doing nothing. But imagine when they don't have to, the scale's in the floor, the sensor is embedded in their body and it's picking up all of these data and it's sending it and actually can do an early warning system than a reactive. That'll be amazing, and some of that technology isn't that far off. The challenge isn't the technology, it's how are all these things going to feed then into care delivery? What do you do if you find out that my heart rate's down 10, my weight's up 2, and I didn't turn on the toaster? Like, what do we do with that? I flush the toilet twice in the night. You don't know you know, I blow my nose, or, I mean, you don't know. And so I think we're gonna get excited thinking that we know, and we're not gonna know. We're not gonna know, but you gotta start somewhere.
We've got time for one more question if someone's got one. All right. Well, if that's it, can everyone please give a warm round of applause for Sheri? Sheri, thank you so much.